Meghan believed the palace had exhausted every weapon it could use against her. She was wrong. Behind closed doors, without warning, ceremony, or negotiation, King Charles approved a private constitutional directive, removing her name from every internal royal succession record connected to the crown. No announcement reached California first. No courtesy call came from London. She discovered the truth only after the decision had already become irreversible. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone at Clarence House understood the danger. He summoned his constitutional secretary and 2 legal advisors, ordering that no aides, press officers, or relatives be told. A constitutional directive was a formal instruction shaping duties, records, and emergency authority, and this one reached into Harry's household. The king listened as each clause was read, but his eyes stayed fixed on one name. Silence tightened around the table. Meghan appeared beside Harry in the palace succession records, files used to plan accessions, regencies, ceremonies, and national emergencies. A regency meant temporary rule for a monarch unable to perform duties, making the wording far more serious than a change of style or seating. Charles lifted the pen, stopped, and stared, until one advisor shifted uneasily. Then the monarch said the crown could no longer preserve a place for someone who had rejected its authority. The signature landed like a verdict. Charles removed Meghan from palace-maintained succession records, contingency plans, regency documents, and family protocols linked to the crown. A hidden provision pushed further, ordering the change into every accession or emergency plan involving Harry and their children. The king set down the pen, closed the crimson folder, and instructed his secretary to erase her name before sunrise. Thousands of miles away, Meghan's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from a former palace contact. She read it twice, gripping the kitchen counter as the meaning settled over her. Harry entered, saw her face, and asked what had happened. She demanded to know why nobody had warned them. Harry dismissed the message as impossible until his trusted London advisor refused to answer. A second palace number disconnected when he identified himself. His anger vanished into fear. Meghan lowered the phone and told him, "Your father has erased me." She understood that this was not symbolic humiliation. The directive could redefine how the palace recognized their children, their marriage, and their entire branch of the family. But before Harry could demand an explanation, he had to face the far more painful truth, that this decision had been shaped by wounds running through every member of his family. The succession order was written in law, but the battle surrounding Meghan had never been about names on a page alone. It was about a father who believed his son had abandoned him, a son who believed his wife had been sacrificed, and a woman who refused to accept that the palace could define her place. Beneath the constitutional language waited something far more dangerous, a family grievance without forgiveness. Charles did not see the directive as cruelty. He saw the monarchy as a living chain of duty, even when personal wishes had to yield to institutional survival. To the king, removing Meghan from internal planning was not revenge, it was a boundary. Yet boundaries drawn by a monarch could feel like punishment to a son convinced the palace had taken too much. Harry felt that wound immediately. Meghan had never been born into the succession line, but her recognition inside family protocols and regency planning had become proof that their marriage mattered. Regency planning meant the arrangements used if a monarch could not perform royal duties. An exclusion from those files told Harry that the palace no longer viewed his wife as part of its future. He remembered promising her that leaving Britain would protect her. Now his father had reached across an ocean with one signature. Meghan's shock hardened into anger when a message confirmed that senior family members had known constitutional discussions were underway. None had warned them. None had asked whether the decision would deepen the fracture. She looked at Harry and asked how many people had discussed her life while pretending silence was mercy. Harry carried that question into the room and called William. The prince answered, but neither brother spoke at first. William had been told that Charles intended to revise internal succession protocols, the palace rules shaping emergency roles and ceremonial standing, yet he had not learned Meghan would be named until hours before the signature. Harry asked whether he knew. The future king chose his words carefully. "I knew father was closing a door. I did not know he intended to lock it." William's answer brought no comfort. Camilla had urged Charles to avoid warning Harry, fearing pressure, leaks, and family war before the directive could be secured. The Queen Consort believed secrecy would contain the damage. Instead, it made every silence look like betrayal. Harry pressed his brother for the reason. William hesitated, then admitted one confrontation involving Meghan had changed everything. Charles had stopped seeing compromise as possible after that night. And behind that locked door stood the single incident that transformed years of resentment into a decision Charles believed he could no longer postpone. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears insignificant until history turns back and identifies it as the fracture point. For Charles, that moment came during a private Windsor commemoration intended to restore family unity. Instead, one disputed chair, one refusal, and one sentence spoken before the household convinced the king that Meghan no longer wanted recognition within the monarchy. She wanted the power to challenge it from outside. Months before the secret directive, Charles had arranged a private commemoration at Windsor Castle to honor Queen Elizabeth's legacy. He hoped Harry and Meghan's remote participation would signal a cautious return to family cooperation after years of bitterness. The gathering was meant to unite the household around memory, duty, and loss. Instead, it exposed how differently each side now understood respect. Palace officials prepared a formal order of recognition, the approved sequence deciding how royal names and roles would be presented during the ceremony. Working royals appeared first because they still carried public duties on behalf of the crown. Non-working relatives followed. Meghan's name remained included, but without the ceremonial styling she expected, and that distinction quickly became the heart of the dispute. Meghan refused to accept the arrangement during a secure planning call. She demanded that her name appear beside Catherine's in the family acknowledgement, insisting that marriage to the king's son could not be treated as a lesser bond. The Princess of Wales was not part of that call, yet her position became the comparison around which the argument tightened. Harry supported his wife, warning that another public downgrade would destroy any hope of reconciliation. Charles joined unexpectedly. Meghan told him that the palace could not invoke family whenever it needed unity, then hide behind hierarchy whenever respect was distributed. The king listened without interruption. When she finished, he ended the call without answering. The silence that followed concealed something darker. A senior courtier later gave Charles a draft public statement prepared by Meghan's representatives in case the palace rejected her demand. The document described the protocol as institutional exclusion by design. Charles circled the words, folded the page, and asked whether any future accession plan could safely depend on cooperation from California. That question changed everything. An accession plan meant the arrangements used when one monarch dies and another takes the throne, making trust essential during moments of national uncertainty. Charles began exploring how Meghan could be removed from every internal constitutional scenario before another disagreement became a public challenge. After the call, the king remained alone at the long table. He moved Meghan's place card away from the family grouping, turned it face down, and told the secretary, "No institution can survive if every act of inclusion becomes another demand." Yet when Meghan finally understood which moment Charles had used against her, she refused to let his judgment stand without confronting the man who had delivered it. There were no courtiers to soften the language, no public smiles to disguise the fury, and no carefully arranged room in which royal discipline could be maintained. When Meghan finally reached Charles, the conversation began with controlled voices and collapsed within minutes. She accused him of punishing her for refusing silence. He accused her of turning every private bridge into a public weapon. Then Harry entered, and everything broke open. Harry had secured the private video call only after warning the palace that he would speak publicly unless his father explained the directive himself. Charles agreed, but imposed one condition: no aides, no lawyers, no advisors, and no recordings. The king expected his son to appear alone. Instead, Meghan sat beside him, calm at first, though the anger beneath her voice was already impossible to hide. Meghan asked how a grandfather could erase the mother of his grandchildren without offering her a single conversation. Charles answered that he had changed constitutional planning, not blood. Constitutional planning meant the private arrangements governing royal duties, emergency authority, and future accession procedures. To him, the distinction was clear. To her, it sounded like a cold excuse, designed to separate family from power whenever the palace found it convenient. Harry interrupted before his wife could respond. He accused Charles of hiding personal punishment behind the crown, using official language to disguise a private grievance. The monarch struck back. He reminded his son that Harry had repeatedly demanded freedom from royal control, then objected when that separation became formal. The words landed brutally because both men knew the argument was no longer about protocol. It was about abandonment. Meghan leaned closer and revealed that she knew the directive reached far beyond ceremonial records. She asked whether Archie and Lilibet's future recognition had also been restricted. Charles did not answer. His silence confirmed that other changes existed within the children's files. Harry pushed his chair backward and demanded every document. Meghan leaned toward the screen and said, "You did not remove a title. You removed a mother from her own family's future." Charles closed his eyes briefly, then answered, "You asked to stand outside the institution. I have stopped pretending you remain inside it." Harry rose so suddenly that his chair struck the wall. The king ended the argument with one final warning. The directive had been reviewed by figures whose authority even his son could not overturn. The confrontation revealed Charles's resolve, but it also exposed that the king had not acted alone, and the names behind the directive would wound Harry even more deeply. Charles carried the burden of the signature, but the machinery behind Meghan's removal had been assembled by a circle that understood the crown's vulnerabilities better than anyone. Lawyers shaped the language. Courtiers measured the risk. Camilla urged silence. William studied the consequences. Yet the most decisive voice came from someone who had spent a lifetime watching personal turmoil threaten royal duty, and she refused to allow another crisis to reach the throne. Charles had not trusted one opinion alone. His constitutional secretary reviewed every clause beside the Keeper of the Privy Seal and independent legal counsel. The Keeper of the Privy Seal was the senior official responsible for protecting formal royal authority, while the lawyers ensured the internal changes did not openly contradict succession law. They knew the distinction had to be exact, because one careless sentence could turn a family decision into a constitutional scandal. The palace therefore framed the directive around Meghan's institutional recognition. She was not a blood heir, so the order could not simply remove her from the legal succession. Instead, it excluded her from regency support structures, ceremonial family listings, emergency consultation, and accession contingency documents. Those files governed how the household would act during a change of monarch or national crisis, making the removal quiet but powerful. William felt the danger before anyone spoke. He read the final draft in a private study and stiffened when the wording extended beyond Meghan to Harry's household. The future king warned Charles that this could destroy the final chance of reconciliation between the brothers. The king listened, but he did not withdraw the document. Camilla pressed in the opposite direction. She argued that delay would give Harry and his wife time to turn an internal revision into another global accusation. The queen consort believed silence was not cruelty but control, and control was now the only thing preventing another public explosion. Anne became the deciding voice. The Princess Royal argued that anyone rejecting royal duty could not expect automatic authority within emergency crown planning, yet she refused to punish the children. She demanded a safeguard, preserving Archie and Lilibet's blood connection while excluding Meghan from advisory, guardian, representational, or regency-related power. Anne placed the document before Charles and tapped the clause protecting the children. She told him, "Compassion must remain, but confusion must end." William looked toward the window, struggling with the cost, while the king signed beneath her handwritten amendment. Harry soon learned his aunt had supported the order, and Meghan began preparing a response that could force the palace into the very battle it had tried to prevent. Once the hidden alliance became known, the directive stopped being a private wound and began reshaping relationships, access, and loyalty across the entire royal family. The first consequences did not arrive through a dramatic proclamation. They appeared as cancelled briefings, altered invitations, restricted contact lists, and unanswered calls. Meghan's removal spread quietly through the palace system, closing one door after another. What Charles had signed in a private room now reached family ceremonies, emergency planning, and the status of the Sussex household. For Harry, the most devastating change came disguised as a single revised invitation. Palace departments moved quickly. Confidential instructions removed Meghan from future accession rehearsals, royal funeral planning, emergency family councils, and ceremonial seating based on succession proximity. An accession rehearsal was the private preparation for the moment one monarch dies and another takes the throne, so exclusion from it carried weight far beyond ceremony. Communications staff received another order. Every reference to Harry's household must separate his birth connection to the crown from his wife's non-participating status. Meghan felt that separation in the most personal way. She opened a revised invitation to a family memorial and found Harry and the children listed individually. Her own name was gone. She studied the blank space, placed the card on the table, and walked away without speaking. Harry followed her, anger rising faster than reason. He insisted he would not attend any gathering that excluded his wife. Meghan stopped him. She knew refusal could be used against them, allowing the palace to present her as the reason he remained distant from his family. That was the trap. Attend and accept the humiliation, or refuse and confirm the story already being written about them. Their legal advisor delivered an even darker warning through a documented private briefing. The directive blocked Meghan from being consulted if Harry were ever required to assume a temporary constitutional role. A second clause removed her from guardian consultation protocols involving the children during a national emergency, transferring recognition to Harry and a palace-approved royal relative. Meghan returned to the invitation and slid it across the table. Harry read it, tore the card in half, and said he was finished asking permission to protect his family. She quietly gathered the pieces and told him anger alone would not defeat the crown. The words stopped him. Meghan began considering a public response, but Harry saw one final path before the conflict became permanent. He would meet Charles alone and force father and son to speak, without the machinery of the monarchy between them. For the first time, Harry understood that protecting Meghan might require restraint rather than another declaration that the palace could weaponize. But before Meghan could launch her answer, Harry chose one final private meeting with his father, without advisors, without cameras, and without her beside him. For years, every conversation between Harry and Charles had carried the weight of advisors, interviews, public accusations, and absent family members. This time, there was no institutional buffer. The prince entered alone. The king dismissed his staff. Behind a closed door, father and son finally confronted the fear beneath the anger. Charles believed Harry was disappearing from the family, while Harry believed the family had erased him long before Meghan's name vanished. Harry returned to Britain in silence, leaving Meghan, lawyers, and communications teams outside the meeting. He wanted no statements prepared and no witnesses waiting to shape the meaning afterward. Charles chose a secluded royal residence, hoping privacy might allow them to speak as father and son, rather than as opposing sides in a constitutional battle. The king opened a locked desk and removed the directive folder. A royal directive was a formal instruction shaping palace procedures and authority, and this one had already changed Meghan's place within the institution. Harry asked him to destroy it. Charles refused, saying an institutional decision could not be reversed because the conversation had become painful. Harry accused his father of proving Meghan's deepest fear, that the palace had never truly considered her family, only a temporary problem to contain. Charles absorbed the accusation in silence. Then his control weakened. He admitted that he had feared losing his son, yet every compromise seemed to produce another public confrontation. His voice broke when he said the separation had already taken years from them that neither man could recover. Charles then revealed what Harry had not known. Archie and Lilibet's blood rights remained protected, and the monarch had rejected a harsher proposal that would have removed the entire Sussex household from palace contingency planning. Contingency planning meant the emergency arrangements used during illness, death, or a sudden change of sovereign. The revelation did not erase Harry's anger, but it changed its direction. Harry acknowledged that Meghan's demand during the Windsor commemoration had gone too far. Still, he argued that the palace had answered pride with permanent exclusion when one honest conversation might have prevented everything. Charles pushed the folder toward Harry, but kept one hand resting on it. Harry placed his palm on the opposite side. Neither man pulled it away. The king said, "I will not restore her authority within the crown." His son answered, "Then you will recognize her dignity outside it." After a long silence, Charles nodded. The directive would remain, but the monarch agreed to issue a private clarification, protecting the children and affirming Meghan's place within Harry's personal family. That fragile agreement could not stop the story from escaping into public view, but it would determine how the monarchy faced the storm once the world learned Meghan's name had been removed. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained within royal folders and private calls. It exploded across broadcasts, phones, breakfast tables, and palace gates. Supporters called the decision necessary. Critics called it vindictive. Yet one image captured the national mood more powerfully than any debate. A newspaper held against the railings of Buckingham Palace. Meghan's photograph crossed by a single black line beneath 4 words, "Erased from the crown." A leaked summary had reached a major British newspaper during the night, forcing Buckingham Palace to respond before speculation hardened into accepted truth. The first statement confirmed that internal succession-related protocols concerning the Sussex household had been revised. Those protocols were the palace's private plans for future accessions, regencies, ceremonial duties, and national emergencies. They were not the legal line of succession itself, but to the public, that distinction felt almost impossible to separate from the emotional reality. Broadcasters repeated the explanation throughout the morning. Harry remained connected to the crown by birth. Archie and Lilibet retained their family position. Meghan, however, had been removed from the internal structures surrounding royal authority. Every discussion returned to the same brutal question. Had Charles merely clarified existing limits, or had the king used those limits to deliver a personal punishment? Meghan watched the coverage from California, forcing herself to remain calm as commentators debated whether she had ever possessed the standing now withdrawn. Her restraint broke when one presenter called her constitutionally irrelevant. She switched off the television and sat in silence, wounded less by the legal argument than by the ease with which her marriage and motherhood had been reduced to a phrase. Harry's phone filled with messages urging him to release the directive and attack the palace publicly. He refused. The prince had given Charles his word, and breaking it would destroy the narrow agreement they had reached. His silence looked weak to some supporters, but it protected the children from becoming weapons in another public war. Buckingham Palace then issued a clarification affirming Archie and Lilibet's connection to the sovereign. The statement softened the human consequences, yet it restored nothing to Meghan. Charles had protected the grandchildren while holding the boundary around the crown. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath the balcony. One woman placed the "Erased from the Crown" front page against the gates, while another removed it and said children should not inherit their parents' conflict. Cameras captured the 2 strangers standing silently on opposite sides of the same royal argument. When the noise finally began to fade, only one question remained, not whether Charles would reverse the decision, but what each of them would become after accepting that he would not. There was no triumphant return, no dramatic reversal, and no final victory shared by either side. Meghan remained outside the crown's succession machinery. Charles retained the authority he believed necessary to protect the monarchy. Harry preserved recognition for his children, but could not restore his wife's former place. The battle ended not with reconciliation, but with clarity. And clarity, however painful, finally broke the cycle of false expectations that had poisoned the family. Meghan understood what permanence meant. The directive remained in force, excluding her from internal succession planning, regency consultation, accession protocols, emergency councils, and ceremonial recognition tied to royal authority. Regency consultation meant the advice used when a monarch could not perform duties, while accession protocols governed the transfer of power from one sovereign to the next. These were not labels. They defined who would be trusted when the monarchy faced its fragile moments. Harry retained his place by birth, and Archie and Lilibet remained acknowledged as the king's grandchildren. Yet that protection could not erase what had been taken from their mother. Meghan opened the drawer containing the torn memorial invitation, joined the pieces together one final time, then dropped them into the bin. She had considered launching a campaign. Instead, she chose to stop allowing the palace to define the rest of her life. Harry watched her make that choice, and understood its strength. He told his wife that he could not change what his father had signed, but he could stop measuring their family's worth through royal approval. For the first time, his promise was not about correcting the past, it was about building a future. Across the Atlantic, Charles placed the clarification protecting the children beside the original directive and closed both inside his desk. His final act was neither rejection nor reconciliation. It was a boundary shaped by duty, fear, and regret. William absorbed the lesson in silence. The future king knew he would inherit not only the crown, but the burden of preventing constitutional order from becoming emotional cruelty. Anne remained convinced the decision had saved the institution from uncertainty, though she could not deny the wound left behind. Meghan's removal had strengthened no one. It had exposed the cost of pride replacing trust. The monarchy survived, but survival came with a human scar. And so the crown kept its order. Meghan reclaimed a life beyond its approval. Harry chose his household over an unwinnable battle, and Charles was left with the silence of a decision that protected the monarchy while permanently changing his family. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.